Welcome back to It Tastes Like Burning. This is Matt.
This is Jesse.
And we managed to find someone rummaging around in the back of the station again, and we decided to bring Jack back. Say something, Jack.
Morning.
That'll work.
Something Jack.
I've been called many things.
You missed your opportunity there for the something Jack. I state your name.
So, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, we're going to talk, since Jack is the chaplain, I thought we'd talk about some of the mental strain of being a volunteer firefighter and some of those things that go along with that, and kind of what a chaplain does and some of those duties, and we might venture off into how does a chaplain help the non-faithful and some of that too. That's a good opportunity for that. We can even touch on how a chaplain helps the non-faithful.
I think that's important. Part of the chaplain service is, regardless who or what their faith is, you're there to help them work through certain issues they're going to face in the fire service.
So when we talk about certain issues, what kind of stuff are we talking about? Because I know what comes to mind for me, and there's high stress, there's family stuff that happens. Like what kind of stuff can you help with?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind is on-scene incidents, and some of them are more difficult than others. And I know having your leadership in the department watch out for those incidents and then relay that to you so you can actually address some of those things. But the department I came from before, just like you, a lot of times when you showed up on scene, it was people you knew. Some of the more stressful things I went through that led me to the chaplain service were actually showing up on scene of accidents, fires, and it was friends of mine, children of friend of mine, different things like that. And I didn't realize at the time, but it had a big effect on me. And I saw how I had to personally work through that. And on the volunteer side, a lot of times you don't have somebody there to address those issues and help walk you through those things. And so it just gave me a passion to be able to help people through that.
That's awesome. Matt, what do you...
For a bad analogy is that it's literally like a barrel full of monkeys. You don't know, each and every person's an individual, and you don't have a clue at what is going to be their trigger.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it can be strictly personal life. It can be something that happened on scene. It can be personality clashes at the station. And it can be all three of them that domino into each other.
And we actually have some people that are carrying PTSD from experience past. We have a lot of veterans, and they're still working through some of those issues, and I've had to counsel with a lot of them. And it just, it's a melting pot of different attitudes and different backgrounds, and you have to bring that together. I think one of the most important things is to be super vigilant about watching mannerisms, seeing changes in attitude, changes in their tolerance to handle certain situations. And a lot of times we don't even see that, because while they're here and they go to the scene, then they leave, their families are the one who really start to notice those things, the spouses, the children. And so often we don't even catch a glimpse of that.
I do think cumulative PTSD is a thing. I think that that is a thing that happens to a lot of people. And personally, does it make me have nightmares and all that? No, but I've gotten very jaded about certain things. And
you become numb to a lot of it.
Yeah, you become numb to a lot of stuff and jaded to the point where, you're just mean or hateful to certain patients or certain types of patients, or, you don't have the best bedside manner with a overdose or something like that. And that's really kind of part of that whole thing in my mind, and it's something you got to be conscious of and work on. But I'm as guilty as the next guy.
There's a seminar that I went to that talks about PTSD and suicide prevention was through NVFC seminar that they had in Grapevine several years ago. And battalion chief that was hosting the program, really long story short, he built this program because he'd had a suicide in his department. And he wanted to become he wanted to try and figure out how to help his guys. They knew that they had an individual with their organization, and he was just showing all the telltale signs of someone that was just exhausted, mentally exhausted with the fire service. And a few months before this guy took his own life, they ran a bad call. And that was it. Like, in hindsight, this battalion chief talks about, like, we should have pulled him aside and immediately forced him to either retirement or a desk job. Even though he'd have been furious with you for doing that to him, in the long run, he would have been very, very thankful. And this battalion chief ultimately became I want to say he has a PhD now in psychology. And he did his entire doctorate on PTSD and suicide prevention inside his organization. And one of the things that he talks about there is that everyone has an emotional cup. And he said, you can't make the cup bigger. You can't ever empty it. And he said there's just a point at where you put too much into it and it just starts to overflow.
And I've heard this analogy before, and it says when you're suffering with PTSD, most people start that morning with that cup empty, and when you're suffering with that, it's already 3/4 of the way full when you get out of bed.
And the kicker is that once you reach capacity, you're done.
Mm-hmm.
You're done. There's coping methods and there's therapy and on, but you're still at capacity. There's no way to ever undo those things. They're there. They'll always be there. That's it. And his program pretty much remained, I want to say, in like the Southern Illinois area, kind of spread a little bit. Then 9/11 happened. And New York's suicide statistics were truly catastrophic after 9/11. And New York had to do something like immediately to help address those problems that they were having. Part of this seminar that I was at, they had a handful of people that had gone up to New York to help out after 9/11. And what they found is that they brought their old firefighters back that went through like the early, mid, and late 70s in New York City was literally a war. It was just sheer hell for the firefighters.
And that's Hell's Kitchen and the air conditioners flying out of windows
Right.
onto the street and stuff like that.
And they brought their old guard in and they got them guys to start talking. And that was like the first recipe in this, was to get the stoicism knocked down, get the not overreaction, but just get the walls knocked down. Well, the question is how do you get through that? You got to get them to talk. Well, that's the hard part, because they're not going to talk to someone that came in after 9/11. Not going to happen. They're going to have to talk to someone that they see as equal, on par, same experience, same pain, same hurt, whatever. That's the really hard part in this, is that you got to find someone that they'll be able to communicate with on the same level. And then from there, once you get them to start talking, it happens pretty quick. They start to truly vent, and they'll decompress pretty hard after that. And we'll talk more about this later, but I can tell you in our department, I personally have seen the benefits of having a critical, what is this system?
Critical stress debriefing,
Yeah.
CSD.
We'll have a team come in, and like I said, we'll talk about that later. But those make big differences. They're good.
And having somebody come in from the outside is very important. Sometimes you don't need somebody within the department actually having that conversation on extreme incidents. But to your point, having somebody that is in the trenches along with you to have those conversations with you, it develops that trust. Coming from the pastoral side, if I just came in as a pastor, somebody would be very hesitant to open up to me. But as someone who is on scene with you and going through the same things, it creates that opening and that trust.
Yeah, that rapport.
But that trust is built over a long time. Even being alongside them and the different members, if they can't trust you completely, that what they are talking to you about will stay confidential unless they are going to try to harm themselves or others, that trust is very important. And being able to have those conversations in faith really leads to them opening up about certain things. Because some of that really feeds into PTSD is not just what we see on scene, but it comes from abuses as a child, whether it be physical or verbal abuse as a child. It can also come from different things that happened at work, different life experiences. Some people I've talked to, it comes from verbal abuse of their spouse or whatever it might be, but that's part of filling that cup. And then they come here and that cup is almost overflowing, and then we go to a bad scene and it makes it difficult. But one of the great things is about a volunteer service is, and we see it all the time, in a paid department, you have something like that and you don't want to talk about it, you still have to show up to work the next day. At a volunteer service, you might not see that person for a few weeks and you wonder what's going on with them, and that's why I'm so quick to reach out to people and ask them about that.
Well, then that stuff, it compounds. One thing compounds on the other, and I had a good friend, fellow firefighter that did commit suicide, and you know that shakes the whole department at that point. I was already gone from there and gone from the department, but it just riddles it to the core. I mean, I couldn't even bring myself to go to the funeral.
Yeah.
I did not go.
I understand.
I found an excuse and didn't go. And there was really no excuse. I should have went, but
we tend to see ourselves in that person's shoes.
oh yeah, no, totally.
Well, the unique thing, it's a double-edged sword. So I'm going to come back to exactly what you were talking about, but I'm going to segue away for a second. Men today, I truly believe this, doesn't matter their age, old, teenager, doesn't matter. Men today very rarely, from our society's point of view, participate in anything anymore. Part of that participation is the camaraderie, the buddies, a place to hang out, a place to belong, an organization to be with, meaning, purpose, goals, directives. And when you join, if you have a really strong fire department, career, volunteer, you build relationships that are really in a short amount of time can become very impactful.
Very much so.
To the individuals. I think that's a benefit that we have. We have a strong organization. We have a camaraderie here that I don't think a lot of volunteer departments quite are able to reach. And we have that. And it's fragile.
Well, I had the conversation with my wife the other day because she was wanting to go hang out with this other couple, and I was like, yes, we can go do that, but realize that I have realized that all of my friends are firemen. I have no friends that are not firemen.
Yeah.
Period. And right, wrong, or indifferent, that's just the people that I gravitate to because there's there's common interests, I can say the things and be gross or do whatever, and it's not seen as out of the norm.
Right. And what ends up happening is that, and they're relationships that get built, developed, and when something happens to one of the individuals in that relationship, it it affects you. And then it gets compounded with assuming that something as terrible as a suicide happens. And again, I can speak on this. We had a member commit suicide a couple of years ago, and we responded to that call. And I'm not going to go into any more detail on that, other than to say that we responded to that call. There was nothing we could do. And we had to, I sat with his wife until family showed up. And shortly after that, we had a debrief team come in, and they were good. And they were beneficial, and they were good for everyone. Now, the funny thing that came out of that debrief was they actually weren't called in for the suicide. They were actually called in for a very bad airplane accident that we'd had 24 hours before the suicide. So that's what the debrief team was called in for, and then circumstance. So when we called the debrief team for a second time, and basically it was like, you need to get here now. And, we just you gave them another update of what happened. And to their credit, they were here within 8 hours, something like that. They had it organized within 8 hours.
It's important to have those teams, and I don't think very many volunteer organizations realize that those resources are out there. Right here in Texas, we have Texas Corps of Fire Chaplains, which I'm a part of, and a great organization, and they will organize that for you. But also nationally, I'm part of, and where I received my training was through the National Federation of Fire Chaplains, stationed out of Irving with Chaplain Jimmy Duncan, longtime chaplain for the Irving Fire Department. He has a long history of chaplain service. He was actually the head chaplain on the West incident, and just amazing guy, and is willing to come and train people in your department for chaplain service. But it has to be a calling, has to be something you're passionate about, and not only that, but is there for you for incidents like that. They are ready and willing. Once you go through the training, you're placed on a list, and when there are incidents, you will receive phone calls saying, hey, we have an incident in this area. We need some chaplains there to debrief for whatever it might be, a suicide or airplane accident, whatever it might be, these bad calls. And they bring a team together that has been trained in the same way. So when they go in there, they are all on the same page and can be effective in what they're doing. But I just want to let everybody know that wherever you're at, there are resources there for these issues, and it's best to find the resources before it happens instead of after.
One thing I'm going to add to this is this was kind of the unique thing from the debrief. A lot of people, particularly at the end of that, they had problems with other calls. So in other words, they took the opportunity to vent on other calls, events, things. And to me, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, that was surprising. to use a hippie word, that was cathartic because now you're getting beyond just the talking points. People have kind of accepted it and they're taking advantage of the opportunity. People started to focus on the other things that were bothering them. And so where I'm going with all this is the one thing it adds is the time, energy, and effort that it takes to try and consider the right time for something like this. I wouldn't wait for the right time. I would actually read it off the membership. Why did we call the debrief in for the airplane accident? Well, the fact of the matter is that we had a ton of 18 and 20-year-olds. That was a really graphic, violent call. A lot of details not going to be used here. You could tell by the look on their faces. They were not ready for that.
Well, and I think that's the important part is on certain calls, I know you have called me before and said, hey, we've been on this call. I need you to check on so-and-so. And I've had other officers call me and do the same thing. And being an officer, I think it's very important to know the people in service with you and be extremely aware of how these things affect them. I've been on scene and seen it myself and approached it directly. But having that awareness as an officer to notice whether it be small attitude difference afterwards, whether it be a change in their home life, their response coming to the station, there's so many things that go into that. And just being aware of these things so we catch it beforehand so we don't see it manifest in unhealthy ways.
Right. Because you see it more probably in the Northeast and in the paid departments and stuff like that. I don't know that we see it as much, but I have seen it. Guys turn to drugs or alcohol
Very
or
much
something
so.
like that. I've lost another friend, and it's just speculation and all that. But I think that's what got him in trouble was the stress of the job, the stress of all that. He started, partying too much there, and it ended up costing him his life in a wreck. You can't connect A to B to C, but that's the kind of thing that you kind of want to be on the lookout for.
It not always leads to suicide. It leads to divorce. It leads to alcohol abuse or drug abuse, prescription pills, all these different things. And another thing we have to be aware of also is injuries, people that receive injuries and using those things to cope with that. And those injuries can lead into those attitude changes also. So it just being aware of those things can make a huge difference.
It's not just the injury itself, it's the treatment for the injury and the narcotics that may or may not be prescribed for the treatment of pain that trigger those symptoms and an addiction that somebody ends up with that they had no intentions of getting, and then all of a sudden now they're addicted to opioids, and but the same things that you're watching for will let you see some of that.
Yeah, very much so. And we see it also in other ways of people are affected. Like we talked about, we see it in their marriages, but we also see it in how they interact with the guys around them here. Some of that will come out on scene, like Matt was talking about, because at that point it's a safe place where nobody's around, because that's a station. Speaking about certain things, you have addressed this before, that in the fire service you are surrounded by alpha males or alpha females. You don't have cupcakes here. Normally, they don't last. And so you're surrounded by these, a lot of times, big egos and different things. And bringing up anything that shows weakness in you, people are fearful of that. They don't want to show weakness.
Well, it's the strong man, I don't need help bullshit.
Yeah, very much so.
one of my favorite statements, and I always kind of giggle to myself when I hear this, when someone, we come off of a really gruesome graphic call and someone says, "Oh, that doesn't bother me." Shut up. Are you a psychopath, you dummy? Because if it doesn't bother you, that means something's wrong with you.
There
You
are
idiot.
bigger issues if it doesn't bother you.
Now, does that mean that you're suicidal? No. Okay. Does it mean that you're going to go home and pop pills? No. All right. But get rid of the facade. Come on. Give me a break. Because like I said, if it doesn't bother you, I need to know that. Because that means you're wrong and something's catastrophically wrong with you. And that's not a strength. That's not an asset, having a psychopath.
I like to tell people when we go into debriefs, I just want you to know that what we see on a regular basis is not natural. It is not natural for humans to see this on a regular basis. And to think that your brain will function normally seeing this on a regular basis and it having no effect with you, that is not natural either. These things are unnatural, and we have to accept that when we see or go through things that are unnatural, we have to go about processes to be able to process that.
Now, one thing, talking about processing, one thing that I try desperately very hard to do with our new members is I try and tell them, try and change the circumstance of what you're doing there. Okay? You had nothing to do with the tragedy. You didn't cause the tragedy. You contributed nothing to the tragedy. We came to see if we could help. In this particular case, we can't. Okay? Does that mean our job's done? No. Our job's not done. We are now the first ones there to give this person respect and dignity and humanity. And because no one would want to ever return back home in that condition. So, our job is to get this person, not patient, okay, because it is personal.
Yes.
You want to take this person and you're going to be the first one to give them dignity, respect, and humanity back so that they're ready to go home. Change the objective of what you're there for. You're not there for the spectacle. You're there to take care of the individual.
And one of the important things is controlling the scene. When you have a probationary member or a young person and you come across a horrific scene, have them do something else. Control traffic, whatever it might be.
Yeah, go pick up cigarette butts.
Exactly, whatever it might be. We showed up to a scene, and a neighboring department showed up, and it was a MVA with multiple fatalities. And he had 2 new members, and he said, "Well, I'm going to get them to pull the body out." And I said, "No, you're not." And he said, "Well, they need to learn sometime." I said, "Yes, and now is not the time." Fact is that you are going to ruin them of the fire service, and you are going to do damage to them immediately, because apparently by how you approach this, you don't have concern about these young men.
And I'm sure you remember the first fatality wreck you went to, right?
Yes.
You remember there?
Yes.
I remember my first.
Very much so.
Yeah, and I remember the chief making the joke that I was stepping in the guy's thoughts. And I look down and it's brain matter on the ground. And I'm like, that's rough.
And it's unnatural. It's
It's
completely unnatural. But that's why in the fire service, the people you are around, and the new guys don't understand it at first, but there is a lot of very dark humor. You will say things that may seem insensitive, but it's a coping mechanism.
Yeah. Well, and I instantly realized that that's what that was, and that's what that off-color joke was about. And it was about letting me know, hey, you're stepping in a puddle of brains, but it was also a way to keep me from fixating on I'm standing in somebody's brain.
Yes.
Yeah. I know from the clinical side of things that they're not a big fan of the dark humor. I personally am,
We haven't noticed.
because it gives people an avenue for starting the conversation.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's why I like it, is that it has the ability to take a really bad scenario and get them to start engaging in the discussion to vent, because that's all I'm after. I don't care about what they say. I don't care about how bad it is. I don't. Kicker, not on scene. Need to
Yes.
add that. But the second that we're in the truck, I want it out.
Yeah.
Talk about it. Get it out. Don't fixate on it. Don't focus on it. Don't let me rephrase that. Don't hide it. Don't suppress it. Don't push it away. I'm saying embrace it. I'm saying acknowledge it, and I'm saying discuss it. Because the faster that you get the pressure relief off of the pressure cooker, and you get the steam valve open, the exponentially safer it's going to be.
Very much so.
Well, just in that dark humor scenario, anybody I've ever seen that didn't respond well to the dark humor ended up in a bad place. Like that they just, it didn't work. Like, but the guys that could cope a little bit with the dark humor generally did okay. But the ones that were like, I can't believe he said that, that's disgusting, those people had trouble and struggled with what they were coping with on the job.
And it takes a little while for someone to start to understand it when they come in. At first, they might not understand it, but pretty soon, it's a coping mechanism they start to use also.
And I give everyone, when they join, a pretty early heads up on that. That I don't care if people start talking about a call and it's a bad call, I don't stop it. I let them talk about it, because I again, better out than in. And sometimes those conversations happen at awkward times.
Yeah, you don't want to do that in front of the family or
Right.
or the children in the preschool or whatever. You know, you can't say they have blue eyes when you're giving your fire prevention.
And it's,
Right.
as somebody who has been through a lot of things, you'll find it very rare for them to talk about those things with anybody outside the fire service. The fact is that we've had people, we were in an interview and a guy asked us, there are a few of us, and he said, what is the worst call y'all have ever been on? And we just looked at each other and we're like, interview's done. You know, it just wasn't something that we're going to discuss with you. The second he leaves, we may have been discussing that amongst each other, but while he was there, that wasn't the case, because I want to, there's a comfort with those who you've been in the trenches with.
Well, and I've pulled it on people that have asked that question, and I've just laid it out there and gave them the most hideous things that you could ever imagine happening, and just went, is that what you wanted to hear?
As graphic
As graphic as I could tell it. Mm-hmm. And just watch their jaws hit the floor, and all right, now shut up and go away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's just one thing that I don't think a lot of people really take into account, particularly with anyone that's been on a volunteer fire department for a while. Call volume's a big part of it, but it's also longevity. The longer someone's been on a department, a much higher likelihood that they've seen some pretty terrible ways people have died. That's something that is not, you can't prepare people for those scenes by telling them about it.
No.
Yeah.
You're just going to have to experience and have, for lack of better words, a calming hand when you show up on those scenes. I can give you a really good example of this. We had a bad car accident. It was had a fatality in it. A whole bunch of other circumstances around this particular car accident. I knew for a fact that the people on the trucks and the other responding department with it had no experience with that accident type. And even though they'd canceled us, I went ahead and made scene because I knew how much carnage there was really going to be. And I'm glad that I went, and I'm glad that I was help that person and get him out of the car, get him back to the family, because that was a tough one. And you just don't take a whole bunch of 1-year people, 20 years old, and put them in that scenario.
You know, and it's more than just the blood and guts.
Right.
It's the mechanism. The mechanism is probably more traumatic to you, seeing the mechanism of injury.
Yes.
Because the realization that literally could be you most of the time, and you're not immune to it. That's a little bit tougher deal than even the blood and the guts.
Well, and another one I'm going to add to that is children.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
That
like,
is-
I'm single. I don't have a wife. I don't have kids. No, I don't mean it to sound as terrible as it sounds when I say it. If we show up to a child death, it doesn't affect me like it does a 24-year-old with a newborn baby. You know, a SIDS call.
Yeah.
That call, it's terrible. It's god awful, but a new parent shouldn't be going to that call. And where I'm really going with this is, in the event that you're on a call and it's too much, step away. Get away.
Yeah.
It's okay.
And that is something I should have learned at a young age. One of the calls that affected me most and did for years, and what really led me into understanding that people need to learn these things, is a Sunday morning we were called out to a structure fire, 2-story structure fire. And it was a kid I coached in Little League was trapped upstairs. And I had to hold his sister back while she screamed to get him out. We weren't able to get him out. It was way farther fully involved than anybody could have done anything about at that point. You were strictly defensive. And at that point, yes, you are showing signs of being offensive for the family, but at that point everybody knows that this outcome was decided long before we got there.
Yeah.
And we, after everything, I was one of the ones who actually had to remove him. And that affected me for a long time. And in ways, just as you were talking about that, it came to my mind and made me emotional, because it's still, in many ways, it does affect me. And at that point, I had my kids were fairly young, and I came home and I woke them up and was just holding on to them. And, but that's one thing that was tougher of being on a department in a small town, is many times I showed up and it was somebody I knew.
Yeah, it was something I was about to mention, is that's the kind of the ultimate crucible for anyone that's on a volunteer department in a small town, or a career in a small town. They know everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
It is just as likely that they're running a family member or a friend or someone well known as it is a complete stranger.
And I had to go home from this, not only that, to tell my son that his friend had died and how he had died. And it was exceedingly difficult. And the effects, I had no idea how bad that was going to affect me for a very long time.
Right.
Because at that point I said, I'm fine, I'll be fine. And
And
wasn't.
this is a perfect segue to go into the suicide that we had on our department. Okay. Personal stress at the organization, not saying a word to anyone, compounds, builds up, gets drunk one night, end result, they take their own life. There's 50 different ways to address it before it ever happened. But here's the kicker. It ultimately comes down to one of two things. Either someone realizing something's wrong and they say something, or the person just simply says something's wrong and they do something. But it's those two things, and if they come to the station as the pressure relief, this is where they're de-stressing, they're venting, and they're not venting about what's bothering them and what their problems are, and they never get the pressure off of them. It just builds and compounds over time. Multiply that by a bad call like you just talked about. Maybe they lose their job. Maybe the economy sucks. Maybe they had another death in the family. Maybe their marriage is terrible. There's 50 different thousand
You
things that
compound
contribute
something
to it.
bad with a loss of hope in the area of your life, and it's difficult.
Yeah, medical diagnosis, just all kinds of
Yeah.
things. You know.
And it's not necessarily a slow burn either. I mean, these things can be a cartoon fuse when they're lit and then just run, where they're fine that morning and by the end of the day, it's a disaster.
And I think people who have never been through some of these things, that when somebody brings it up and you see them actually trying to reach out, they'll ostracize them for it or call them names or different things. And I immediately shut that down, because one day you're going to be that person who needs that talk. If you stay in the fire service long enough, you are going to be that person that needs that talk one day. Not everybody's a machine like Matt. But,
That's right.
Yeah. It's, not everybody, hates old people and dogs. And so, but
Just keeping the world honest.
but we are going to get to that point. It's so important to harbor that mentality in the people in the department, that if somebody's struggling with something, we need to be very open to being aware of it and listening to it, and not making it a focal point of a joke. Or, because there are plenty of jokes to be had, and we love to do that, but there are some things that are very serious, and we have to be hyper aware of those things.
Yeah, and I guess that falls back to that dark humor. That dark humor is about the incident. Mm-hmm. It's never about the person.
No.
And realize that, your fellow firefighters, you've got to be conscious of some of that stuff, because it'll slide right by you and you'll never know that there is a problem. It's so hard to pick up on some of that stuff. Like it's damn near impossible for a guy like me. I just assume everybody's just like me and we're going forward, but that's not the case. It's definitely not the case. There's underlying issues that people have with just depression or anxiety
fear,
or any of those things, or social things, social issues that people have, that because we're such a diverse group of people and we don't have, you're not going through a polygraph and a psychological evaluation and a prostate exam to come in the door. We don't know all those things. And
another contributing factor on this is just, you have someone that really wants to volunteer. It's what they want to do, but the organization they're on is just whatever. They've got a ton of bullies, and they just sit there and verbally beat the living hell out of the. Yeah, it usually is the one person.
And you've got to, some of the younger guys, it's okay, you'll have that. But when you have people, older members in position of authority that do that, that's where it becomes a real issue. To where you have your dinosaurs that are so hardened to it over time that they can't remember the time they weren't.
Well, it's what made them what they are.
Right. And I've said it before to you guys that if there's not somebody that they're upset with, or if there's not a person there that they're kind of turning on, mm-hmm. then they'll literally turn on everybody. And
yeah.
it becomes this deal. So if you're going to have like that nemesis, let's just say, the best thing you can do is make that person outside of your organization.
Yeah.
and it could be whatever. Let it be the police. They're fine with it. They don't care. Like, they really don't care.
City auditor.
Yeah, city auditor. Just, we hate that person, and we're we're going to do everything we can to just hate that person. And having somewhere to push some of that helps, because then it doesn't turn internal, and it just becomes this rash of just feuding hatred in your department. It happens all the time. I've seen it. I've seen it here. I've seen it everywhere.
Well, I think for me it's different coming from a pastoral side, that I am conditioned to being extremely aware to mannerisms and attitudes and how people are functioning, because I'm looking for that all the time. And coming into this area, I look for that all the time also, that I see certain things and I approach it differently, just by starting a conversation with somebody. It's amazing that if you just get somebody talking, it doesn't have to be about their issues, that pretty soon those things will start to come to life. And when they get comfortable in that conversation, some of those things start to come out. You don't necessarily have to come up and be like, hey, is your marriage okay? No, let's just start talking. Let's have a conversation. It could be about, hey, how's work going? What have you been up to? And just open up that dialogue. And like Matt was referring to. And then after you get them talking, some of those things start to come to the surface. But they have to have that comfort at the beginning of it.
Yeah, I mean, and for anyone that might be listening to this thinking that, well, my department's too small, I don't have to deal with this, or I'm not that type of person. Well, let me give you a reality check. Figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you don't, it's going to bite you square in the ass. And if it's not you, it's another chief.
Yes.
So stop being obtuse and reach deep down into the emotional bag and grab the squishy things and realize, yep, those are emotions, and you're going to have to deal with it. Because you can't sit there and tell me that the way our grandfathers went through World War II and look at Vietnam generation and look at that and be like, oh yeah, that's the recipe for success. Stoicism.
Yeah, it worked out great.
Perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It didn't. No one's going to sit there and say that that's the way to handle it. And those men had truly terrible things that they went through. And a lot of them suffered long afterwards.
I saw it with my father. He did multiple tours in Vietnam. He was 101st Airborne. And I saw it with him. But going back to what you brought up, that so many think that we're a small department, that we don't have somebody, or there's not the option for us. I'm telling you, reach out to the National Federation of Fire Chaplains. They will come in and they will train your people. They will come in and they will help you with these things. And so there are options out there.
Here's the one thing I'll counter to that. And this is just from a personal experience. If you truly want your department to benefit from it, get two organizations, yours and someone else, and preferably in another county. Okay? Cross-train together. In the event that they need a debrief team, you would go to them. You need one, they come to you.
Yeah.
I can't overemphasize it how important it is in the event that you're going to be doing a crisis debrief to have a trained stranger in the room.
Yes.
And that's from personally witnessing it and the gigantic benefits of that.
Well, and I also don't think it's fair. You have that incident that's so traumatic that you need these resources, and are you going to really rely on the guy that was also there to carry the burden of everybody else's? That seems insane to me.
It doesn't need to be in a large incident or something like that. It doesn't need to be someone within your own department.
Right. Yeah. So your chaplain's useless at that point.
Yes.
Well, not useless, but
Well, he's the one who organizes getting
he
people
makes
in.
the
and-
phone call,
yes.
but he doesn't
Yeah.
need to carry the burden of all
No.
those other people's emotions.
No, definitely not.
Because when they're giving that stuff off, somebody's taking it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the litmus test? When do I look at it when it's not something that I want Jack to look at and make initial contact with? It's really, for me, it's when it becomes more than an individual.
Yes.
When it becomes multiple,
Right.
that's the litmus test, is when I'm looking to say, okay, we probably need to be bringing someone else in. But if it's personal or station or focused on a individual or maybe two, then I would say kick the chaplain off in there first, let him make his assessment, and here's the kicker: if he comes to you and says that something needs to be done, that's not up for debate. Call into work, take time off, because nothing else matters until you get that set up.
Yes.
Because, again, if your chaplain has training on this and they're saying, no, X, Y, and Z needs to happen, it needs to happen, because he's not telling you, because you got to go back to what he originally said. What was the original statement? He's not going to tell you about the conversation unless he threatened harm to himself or someone else. So if he's coming back to you and saying, I need resources, pull your head out of your ass. He needs resources now, not next month, not tomorrow morning, now.
Very much so. Back to what Jesse says, it's both of you. It's very important to know that some of those things need to come from outside. At that point, you need somebody, a team, to come in from the outside to make those assessments and make those initial contact. And because I can go in there and evaluate, and I'm going to have some conversations, of course, but pretty quickly you can realize that someone needs to come in from the outside to actually spend some time on this.
Yeah. I think a healthy part of this discussion, though, particularly with your new members, revolves around making sure that they're prepared for what it's like to be on scene of a death. And the fact of the matter is whether they're career or volunteer, realistically, at the end of the day, we actually don't ever get toned out to anything good.
No.
No.
Okay? Those occasional cats in a tree, that's about as good as it gets. And that involves about killing yourself every time because you're going to be on a ladder. So it just goes downhill from there.
When you get toned out to a mass casualty, it doesn't matter. When you show up, your emotions don't care whether you're paid or not. And so whether it's from the paid side or the volunteer side, none of it matters. At that point, there has to be some preparation beforehand and some follow-up afterwards.
I do recommend for anyone new on your department, realistically, very, very few people outside of truly public service, they don't have experience with death. That's a very limited amount of people nationwide that, short of like maybe a funeral director's kid. Outside of that, it's not like a cop comes home and tells his kid what it was really like at work, or the firefighter or the nurse and doctor, so.
And some of that, I'm going to say right now, some of that doesn't even prepare you. One of my good friends growing up was a funeral director's son, and we hung out all the time at the funeral home, would hide in the casket room and scare people as they come through. And so it was very dark and twisted, but just a wonderful time.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of funeral directors and a lot of morticians are ex-paramedics and medical or ex-firefighters. That's a big pool of how they get people into that industry, is they pull them out of our industry.
Right.
And part of that due to the years past where the ambulance rolled out of was actually the hearse. It was just doing double duty, but that's where they get folks.
Now, can you get numb to it? I don't like to use the word numb. I like to use the word callous.
Yeah, jaded, calloused.
You do this, at least in our organization, long enough, yeah, unfortunately, you're going to see a lot of death. And it's just the way it is. You've got new members, don't break them in on a really wild call.
If you look at the call notes and you see you see things that you know this is going to be a bad call, and you've got 8 people at the station, it might be okay to leave somebody behind. Explain to them that this might not be the call you go on.
Well, and your primary response area, it's a little bit different because you literally want whoever's there to get out the door and go do that. One of the things, and I did respond mutual, and I've talked to about it before. I responded mutual aid to a mass casualty bus accident. Well, guess who doesn't go to the mutual aid bus accident? The new people. Mm-hmm. They don't get that choice. They don't go. If it takes us 3 more minutes before the truck leaves, it doesn't matter. We're fixing to drive an hour. So 3 minutes isn't going to make any difference in that hour drive. That's where you got to be smart about stuff.
It's the same thought process as when we had 11,000 acres burning not long ago, that you don't send your probationary member on the back of that truck out there. It's you use that common sense, which hopefully you have. I think it should be called uncommon sense nowadays, but you give a little thought process into who you have, what their skill sets are, and who should be out there.
This was a while ago. One of our guys, he's now, I think he's close to his mid-20s. He joined the department young, 16, 17 years old. We get a whopper of a car accident. Bad one. It's fatality. A lot of work on the extrication. And I have 2 young guys and a relatively new father with me. And I kick him off the scene. Not politely. Go to work. A few years later, just again, another bad accident, whatever. And particularly this young guy, he comes up to me and he says, "You have no clue how mad I was when you kicked me off that call." But he's like, "I get it now.
Yeah.
Thank you."
Yeah.
And to me, it's not up for debate.
No.
I'm not going to take an 18-year-old to a gnarly call, and I'm sure as hell not going to have them do the recovery of the individual. No. Not going to happen. In fact, I would just as soon work completely by myself. That way I can mutter and stammer whatever I need to mutter and stammer to myself. And just to get through the call.
We ran a call, a mutual aid call, and we show up, and there was recovery of 2 individuals, and the chief came, and he had 3 people with him, and they were all brand new members. And they were so upset because he said, "No, I would rather y'all do the recovery. I'm going to send my guys back over here." And they said, "Well, this is our scene. We need to be up there doing this." And their chief told them, "Go sit in the truck. I'm not going to listen to it right now." And he had our department go up there and do the recovery. And it speaks to what you were talking about, that he was aware enough to realize that who he had with him, and he had, even though it was his scene, he had another department there with experienced guys who have been through this, and it was best to let them handle that.
One thing I'm going to add before I forget is if you're showing up to a call, it's classically going to be a car accident, could be a structure fire though, could be a suicide, where one of your department's members is involved in the fatality. Okay. once you get past the life-saving part, call in another organization.
Yes.
Don't you do the recovery. Don't just trust me. I'm saying this from personal experience. Call someone else in. I'm going to be really cold here. They died. There's nothing you can do for them. Just spare everyone the grief. Call in another organization.
Yeah, and maybe one that's a little farther away than your closest mutual aid.
Right. Yeah.
Because the time factor doesn't matter at that point.
No.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we had incidents where we got toned out to a suicide, and it was a member's son. And immediately our chief stopped us from going in a route, and we staged. And he said, nope. And we called in mutual aid from a department that was actually not our closest, but we did not enter.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know what the answer is. Like I said, I've had a suicide. We responded, verified it was a suicide, and then we remained on scene. That was a mistake.
Yeah.
I can say that I did the same thing there. We had 4 people on the truck. I went inside, verified what had happened. Medics show up on scene, and same thing. I can't imagine how mad my 3 guys were. I don't
But
care.
it doesn't matter.
No,
It
no.
doesn't matter.
I don't
let them be
care.
mad. You would rather them be mad than damaged.
I'll just to kind of add to this, I think their anger probably subsided as I had to sit on the porch with his wife for about an hour. Don't think they were mad at that point. Like I said, as far as I'm concerned, we screwed that call up beyond belief. I don't know how else we would have been able to handle it. The second half we should have never have done. But once family gets there, and once, I mean, that's it, you know. Just get the hell out of there. There's nothing good that comes out of being there. Nothing.
No.
Nothing.
You know, and I respond not only to a lot of things like that, but not only in a chaplain sense, but also in the pastoral sense that go for follow-up counseling with family, just grief counseling, things of that nature. And there can be some things therapeutic about that. But the fact is that on most departments, if you're not a real large department, that the fact is the responders showing up to one of their own, you are family.
Well, absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely.
Now, to kind of change the subject just a little bit, well, I know we're starting to get a little bit long here. One thing that will kind of change the subject up is I've always joked with Jack here that I'm a nihilist. I'm definitely an atheist. And I'm not going to go into the whole debate
Reasoning,
there.
yes.
But Jack, what would be your recommendations for another chaplain on another department trying to, for lack of better words, console a atheist?
Well, it's very important when you come up on that scene to, at that point, realize who you are talking to. You'll quickly start to understand their belief system or lack of belief system. The number one thing you can do on a lot of times is just listen. Sometimes you don't need to say a lot. As a chaplain, the biggest thing you can do is to listen. If once you learn to shut your mouth, you've taken a big step as a chaplain. That you are there to listen, to console. You don't want to go too far into directing them as far as this is what's happening now, and none of that. Just be there and listen to them. Sometimes even sitting in silence in the room with them, just knowing that you care enough to be there, can go a huge way.
Now, what about a department member?
The loss of a department member, or
No, an atheist department member is what he's getting at.
okay, well, if we have an atheist department member, I mean, Matt and I have a great relationship. We understand each other's belief system, and we
I
even
assure you, I don't understand yours.
same here. But the thing is, though, that we have mutual respect for each other, and we have developed a great friendship over the years. And his because his belief system differs than mine, I still consider him a brother, and I'm going to do everything I can to assist him and help him. Although with Matt, it might be different in his background than it might be another department member.
And I guess it doesn't matter whether you're atheist, agnostic,
Buddhist,
Muslim,
yeah,
Buddhist.
whatever.
It doesn't matter because the consoling and the listening is the same regardless.
Very much so.
You might skip the prayer that you would have with a Christian,
Yes.
but you may also still just pray for them, but they're not going to pray with you.
Well, and you would be amazed at that point, regardless of religious beliefs, you can ask, would you like me to pray for you? Don't ever just start praying for somebody. Ask them, would you like me to pray for you? And you would be shocked that 9 times out of 10, they're going to say yes. They may not say, for me, could you pray for the situation or whatever it might be? And a lot of times they are going to agree to that, but you just don't want to force something on them. But the fact is that regardless of your beliefs, it's at that point, I don't have care for you because of your beliefs. I have care for you because of my beliefs. And that's something we have to understand. The love I have for you doesn't come because of your beliefs. The love I have for you comes because of my beliefs.
Good answer.
Yeah, that'll work. It's just, I don't know, religion and politics are always the two Molotov cocktails in any organization. And you got to be really damn careful when you're talking about them because it can become a pretty standoffish thing pretty quick.
You know, and I would venture to guess, and I've always been in a department with a chaplain. The chaplain was a Christian-based chaplain. I would assume that you could take any of the older guys that's level-headed, that's not extreme in any direction, just kind of a down-the-middle older guy that's solid and level-headed, send them to training.
Yes.
And they would function just as well as anybody else in a sense.
Well, I want you to think about this. When you show up on scene and you have multiple people who are devastated, you don't immediately think, is this person Christian or is this person Buddhist or is this person Muslim? No, compassion kicks in. If you can find somebody who has some compassion to them, then they are a good candidate to be able to do that. Because it's not about a religious thing, it's about a human thing, a compassion that is driven by that. And of course, through my compassion, I have a way of going about that and going from, as you talk about political, into, I spent time in the political realm, then went into pastoring. People say, well, you went from politics to pastoring, you must be a glutton for punishment. And apparently I am, because then I went in also in fire service. But it's a compassion issue, that we have compassion for those around us. We serve in the fire service to help others. Some of that comes from compassion. People are compassionate. Not Matt, because he's nihilist, but everybody else is compassionate. And so, we have a wide variety of people, and regardless of their political or religious beliefs, if you show compassion, you can be effective.
Well said.
Works for me. How we doing on time?
Oh, we're hour 12. We can wrap it up whenever.
We're in a good spot. last thing I'm going to close with is that there's a lot of resources online. So if you have someone that you're kind of concerned about, jump online, do some basic research, and you don't necessarily have to have a talk with someone. You can just give them a phone number and say, hey, if you're having a problem, you can call this number. Be careful just diving into someone's problems completely unannounced. They may not appreciate that at all. So,
Well, and realize too, you're not a therapist unless
Right.
you actually are a therapist, and that's one of those things that you know what resources are available to you for fires and all that. Go out there and find out. Even if you don't have that chaplain or whatever, go find a local therapist that's willing to be on call for when you need help.
As an EMT, you show up to a call, you know when you're outside your scope of practice, correct?
Right.
Same thing with talking to somebody. You know, I understand that there are certain areas that I'm not going to touch. It's outside of my scope of practice. I do pastoral counseling, but some people aren't looking for that.
Right.
You know, and whether they need different kinds of help, I mean, that's great, and the resources are there. So I encourage everybody to look for those resources.
Yeah.
I think the last thing I'll say is firefighters are so used to going out and helping other people, they don't know how to help themselves.
Yes, very much so.
And there's resources specifically intended for you that are directed to help you. Again, at the end of the day, that individual's going to have to ultimately be the one to take that step. There's nothing wrong with helping, showing them the way, maybe opening their eye to the resources, but don't try and force it, because that's not going to work either.
Yeah, you can't. It won't work.
But I encourage everyone, if they have someone, if they are interested in starting a chaplain program and having those people, reach out to Texas Corps of Fire Chaplains or reach out to Jimmy Duncan with the National Federation of Fire Chaplains, and they have the resources to come do the training. They are happy to do it, and there are a ton of resources out there. He has a huge database of chaplains across the country. Once you become steeped in this, that they are there to respond to help you when you approach some of these incidents.
And I've got the perfect closeout for this. If you have any questions about the Chaplins program, even if you're not in Texas and you need help finding someone, you can always reach out to ittasteslikeburningcast at gmail.com, and I'll put you in touch with Jack. Or if you have any other questions, concerns, comments, theories, conjectures, or stimulating conversation pieces, go ahead and shoot us an email. Outside of that, this is Matt.
This is Jesse.
And this is Jack.
Have a good evening.